Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Untitled Libraries. We're really excited tonight because it's actually our first author talk inside our library for nearly 18 months. So really excited about that. We're pleased to have here with us tonight Nick Warner talking about his fantastic book, The Boys Club, Power, Politics and the AFL. Before we begin though, I would like to respectfully acknowledge on behalf of Moonee Valley City Library, the traditional custodian of the land that we're currently on, the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. You're all wearing your masks, so well done. If you could turn your phones to silent, that would be really good. Now, during the past 12 months, we have had to develop a different way of conducting our successful author program. We have had a full program of online author talks, some of which you can catch up on our YouTube channel. Some of the authors include Jess Hill, Pavel Parrott, Christian White, and Jacinta Parsons, just to name a few. Next month, our live author talks will continue here at Sam Merrifield Library with Lynn Yelwood discussing her much-lauded thriller, The Silent Listener. Now, a good way to find out about our upcoming events is to subscribe to our e-newsletter, Read On. You can do this through the catalogue or you can ask one of our staff members that they can help you. On your seats, you will find a short feedback form about tonight's session. We would be grateful for any of your comments as it assists us in planning for future events. Now, you probably noticed that there's a camera set up. We will be streaming this live, or we are streaming it live, and we will be recording it for our YouTube channel. If you're concerned about privacy issues, don't worry, because obviously they won't be showing any of you tonight. Now, Nick will talk briefly on how he came to write the book, followed by some questions that I have for him. We will then open it up for you and the audience to ask questions. And if you are watching this live and wish to ask a question, please enter it in the Q&A section of Zoom. We aim to wrap up the formal part of this evening at 8 p.m. We have Kate here from Collis Booksellers. She will be selling Nick's book, and Michael will be signing after the event. So thank you. That's it. Now, a little bit of background on Michael. Nick. You may have heard him on 3AW, seen him on Channel 7's Talking Footy.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, but you would have seen him on Talking Footy. He is an award-winning investigative journalist with Melbourne's Herald Sun. He won the 2018 Alf Brown Award as the Australian Football Media Association's Most Outstanding Performer, and he has collected multiple Melbourne Press Club Quill Awards, News Awards, and an Australian Sports Commission Award for his coverage of the Essendon supplement scandal, the West Coast Eagles illicit drug scandal, and the Melbourne tanking affair. Nick comes from a very distinguished family. His grandfather was legendary war correspondent Dennis Warner, and his father, the highly regarded Australian diplomat and intelligence chief, Nick Warner. Everyone, welcome Nick Warner.
Thanks everyone for coming. And you've given away most of the story there. But the fact, my background is I got out of university in 1998, October 1998. It's the only place I've ever worked, had one job. And I think that's partly because being a journalist, it's such an exciting career that you never really want to leave. And so I've been happy with where I've been at the Herald Sun. I worked 1 year in New York when I was a young fellow, a long time ago, but mostly Herald Sun all that time. Back in 98, I was a cadet, and you would do police rounds or state politics. So I actually spent the first 12 years of my journalism career in the front end of the newspaper, covering, I was a state political reporter, did the Underworld War, which you would all know, I was the gaming reporter covering Crown Casino, and I always knew they were rotten, and now we know for sure. And so, to me, that was a really good breeding or way to then go into sport journalism, which in 2008 or 9 I was asked to go across to the sports department at the back end of the newspaper. And I must admit, initially I didn't want to do that. As much as I've always loved footy, I've always played footy. I played until I was 36, why I can't really walk properly anymore. But I had a passion for the game, and I always thought that if I reported on it, maybe that would take away. I'm a mad Richmond supporter, and up until recently, we never had much success. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to merge the two, but as fate would have it, I went across and reported full-time on purely the politics of Australian rules football. And as you know, in Melbourne, AFL is like a religion, and that sort of makes its way into the boardrooms. To be someone in Melbourne, you inevitably are on a board. You're an Eddie Maguire type, you're a Jeff Kennett. And so this power and politics, as I say in the book, fascinated me, and it was also a passion. So it was an obvious connection. But I guess the basis of the book was that having come from that other part of politics, that other part of journalism, where stories are usually prosecuted thoroughly, there was something about the AFL system that frustrated me, and that was if you were covering a big scandal, and it's the ones I covered. The first major one was the West Coast Eagles illicit drugs crisis of sort of 2006-07. Then Melbourne tanking saga, and the big daddy of them all was the Essendon saga, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But there's been others, the Talia brothers investigation, which was surrounded with 2015 elimination final between Bulldogs and Adelaide, where there was allegations of inside information. There's a regular flow of these scandals, but what would frustrate me is you would investigate those stories. It would come to its climax. The AFL would hold a press conference. They would announce their findings, which more often than not didn't really pass the sniff test. But the way that the industry is designed is that after a few days of ridicule and debate, the show would go on, there would be games played, and it would be largely forgotten, and I would say unresolved. There were so many unanswered questions, and one of the things that I wanted to do, and was the basis of the book, is I would never let go of that. I would always try and find a document or try and find a tape or more evidence around that story to say that the way that the AFL wrapped that up in a neat little bow was unsatisfactory to me. And so going back all those scandals that I mentioned, the illicit drugs crisis of West Coast, for example, not many people knew, but at the time the AFL hired a retired Supreme Court judge to have a look at what had been going on at West Coast. And as Gil McLaughlin pointed out, when I managed to get my hands on that report 10 years later, only 3 copies of that report were ever made, and they were pretty confident it would never see the light of day. But it did, and it's in the book. Same with the Melbourne tanking scenario, where, if you all remember, Gil McLaughlin famously said that he didn't actually know what tanking was. And when I was able to get the transcripts of the interviews that the AFL Integrity Department had with all the Melbourne officials, it was clear what tanking was. It was deliberately setting out to lose matches, but they didn't want that outcome. And of course, they didn't want that outcome because it would affect their commercial interests and their gambling licenses. So on and on it went until we hit the Essendon saga. And by that stage, I had decided that I needed to write a book to put it all into one place so football supporters and Victorians and Australians could see what I say is this system in need of reform. The other side of that is the system itself, which We all know the game of Australian rules is so popular, has been for 150 years. The current AFL didn't invent the product, even though they would like to think they did. You would think they did. They were getting 120,000 people to games 100 years ago, 50 years ago. The game is so popular that they really can't go wrong, even though they have in places like the Gold Coast. But the power that was entrenched with the AFL, and it was interesting that the VFL, which is in our town, which was the competition, it wasn't necessarily going to be the case that the VFL became the AFL. There were other bodies that were pushing for a national competition. It's just that the VFL got there first because they were more sophisticated. In fact, there was a time where John Elliott, in the early days of his Carlton presidency, was considering a breakaway sort of Super League. And it's fortunate that that didn't happen, and the VFL got its act together. And we needed a national competition. I love the game, and I think the national competition's largely worked quite well. But what happened was the power of this commission model that they set up to whether the original system was that the VFL board of directors, a representative of each of the 12 clubs would sit on this board. But as the game commercialised, it became unworkable, and they needed an independent body, which became the commission. But as I say in the book, the real power is no longer with the commission. It's the executive that sits under the commission, where the real power of the AFL resides, and that's probably from when Demetrius started, not probably, definitely. When Demetrius started and then into Gil McLaughlin, it's a very powerful entity. We know the revenues that the game generates, $800 million a year pre-COVID. There were 795 staff at the AFL before COVID, which is basically one for every player. Their wages were out of control. In Demetrius' final year, he paid himself $3.8 million. So they became this juggernaut. And John Cain, who I was fortunate enough to interview before he passed away, said that in his public life, the AFL was the most powerful entity he'd ever known in the state of Victoria, which really says a lot. And the other thing about that is, I know that people on the AFL, I'm not sure whether they're joking or not, but their own sense of their power. There's one commissioner was known to say that the demise of the Catholic Church meant that Victorians looked up to them, the AFL, the guidance and leadership. So it's all of these themes that I wanted to put into one place, and that took me 3.5 years to write. And I think most people I know who've read it have enjoyed it, and hopefully joins the dots up for them. So that's the essence of the Boys Club.
Well, I have read it, and it's really well researched, and I recommend you all read it. You're all here, so I do have some questions for you, Nick. So let's start off with the AFL Culture Independent Inquiry that's been announced. How does that make you feel? And it was your investigative work in the Boys Club that set the flame through. Do you think this means real change within the AFL?
Well, I hope so, but I've never known the AFL to commission a report that they didn't know the outcome for, or they didn't, wasn't going to blow them up. So I'm a bit cynical. But having said that, they have, those of you who don't know, that they have announced an independent inquiry into the mistreatment of women at AFL House and other state bodies. As a result of some of the allegations of women that I spoke to in my book, and Jess Halloran at the Australian did a big expose about 2 months ago. Some of these women who I interviewed in the book and that Jess spoke to said at times in their life that they would rather not be alive than to talk about the things that they endured at the AFL, which I think it's pretty shocking. It's not only the AFL, of course, it's the problem, but the AFL puts itself up as a leader in the community, and sometimes I don't think it lives up to those values internally. So hopefully, yes, something comes of that inquiry, but we'll see. And those women deserve justice. And men, there was one gentleman in there who received a $200,000 bullying payout plus ongoing medical expenses. So I don't think you make those sort of payments to victims without serious wrongdoing.
Jeff Kennett actually pops up in the book quite a bit. So that Jeff Kennett says about this book, a frighteningly honest account of cover-up, the failure to exercise good governance, massive conflicts of interest, and the total lack of transparency. Now, some big names have rallied around the Boys Club. Will this push by club presidents be enough, do you think?
When you're your own world governing body, you tend to, and that's the conundrum, the interesting thing about the AFL is this quirky little game, the bottom of the earth that we all fell in love with, but that there really is no higher authority than the AFL, whereas, rugby league is huge in the northern states, but they have very powerful state bodies. They also have international bodies. So we're unique in that sense that we run our own, the AFL are in control of their own destiny and they police themselves, they're judge, jury, executioner, integrity matters, etc. We've had a review of the system in the past. In 1993, a guy called David Crawford, who was an accountant, he did a review of the AFL system, the commission model. And if you talk to Peter Gordon, which I did for the book, who was the famous Western Bulldogs, twice president, saved them in 89, I think it was, and then came back and got them the premiership. He actually thought that when they pushed for that first review, in 1993, they got actually the opposite of what they wanted. They got an even more powerful commission system, all conquering. But that aside, there are a growing number of club presidents. Jeff Kennett, I think he's a real thorn in the side of the AFL because he actually says what he thinks. And you're not supposed to do that when you work in the AFL industry. You're supposed to do what you're told. And a lot of the problems that I see in the industry is that you have the Boys Club isn't just the administrators, by the way. It's this whole symbiotic relationship between club boards, player agents, journalists, unfortunately, who are all part of the system. But probably not for that video, right? But the presidents, a growing number of presidents are pushing for another independent review of the system. Andrew Pridham, the Sydney Swans boss, Peggy O'Neill, the Richmond boss, Kennett, what they are saying, which is being resisted by the AFL, is it's time, it's been 28 years, to assess the system. And I think that's completely reasonable. In fact, I say we need it. But the AFL, again, don't have to agree to that. What's quite interesting and forgotten is the club presidents, the commission actually serves at the pleasure of the club presidents or the clubs. That's the way the system was designed, but that's been forgotten over time. And now the club's basically subservient to the AFL, the money distributed in such ways that if you were to take on the AFL, they would dispute this to the AFL, but they can make life difficult for clubs. So you have performance line. That's the way the system is designed. And even though those voices, Pridham and O'Neill and Kennett, are pushing for review, I think it's unlikely you'll get half of the presidents to unite. A bit like herding and cats, unfortunately, to get them all to agree. So I think we're long overdue for reform, but I don't think we're going to get it, unfortunately.
So the book shines a light on almost 2 decades of questionable conduct and the AFL's cosy relationships with governments, politicians, regulators, and sections of the media. Can you take us through some of the biggest shocks for you as a journalist while you were researching the book?
Yeah, so I tell the story through the chronological order of the scandal that engulfed the game. And to be fair, a lot of the scandals are not actually of the AFL's making. They're players at West Coast doing what they did, or there was Melbourne choosing to not win matches. Having said that, though, it was the AFL's priority pick system that actually that encouraged Melbourne to say, hey, if we don't win a certain number of games, we'll get Tom Scully and Jack Trengo. The folly of that theory, of course, is that when they did get those two players at picks 1 and 2 in the 2009 draft, sitting at pick 3 was a kid called Dustin Martin, the Richmond guy. So, that's probably the guy they should have gone and got. And that just shows you the folly of what Melbourne did. But what was the question again?
Yes, so what were the biggest shocks?
Oh, yeah. So in sort of controlling these scandals, the AFL was such a powerful entity that it was able to, you take the Essendon saga, the way it was able to align itself, if that's the right word, to engage with ASADA, which should be an independent anti-doping authority, the joint investigation, the way that the Victorian casino regulator, which you all would have seen on Four Corners during the week, failed spectacularly to police Crown Casino. If it wasn't for a New South Wales inquiry, we would never have known things that have come out for Crown in Melbourne. And our regulator, I think, is rightly being described as a lapdog, not a watchdog. It was allowing Crown to get away with these things. And I say that the same things were happening with the regulator in terms of the tanking, because when Melbourne was setting out to lose those games, Victorians were betting on those matches. And we don't like betting, there's too much of it, but the fact of the matter is people were betting on those matches thinking Melbourne was trying to win, but they weren't. And so if that had been exposed, the regulator had done its job properly, there would have been a lot of problems for the AFL. So I guess what I'm saying is that the power of the AFL to be able to rely on not just people within its industry but on the outside is concerning. The billions of dollars in funding, access to public stadiums like the MCG, SCG, the Gabba. That's fine that they should have those things, but I say that in order to have that funding and that access, that they should have to commit to high standards of transparency and accountability, certainly integrity investigations. So that's probably just the fact that this has been able to go on for 2 decades. That's probably what concerns me the most, and also the fact that it doesn't seem to be any appetite for change in governments. Governments that think, well, the other aspect, they don't pay tax.
Yes.
So if they're not for profit, and that's fine as well. If you want clubs, we all want our clubs to be successful. But I say, in exchange for that tax-free status, surely you have to meet these requirements that I just mentioned of accountability, transparency, and integrity, which, in my opinion, they have not. There's no government that's really willing to take them on, because, as we know, they're more powerful. They have a greater role in the Catholic Church, according to them.
To say that while I was reading the book, there was a lot of jaw dropping. Like, it's unbelievable, really, what they get away with. We talked about it before, but your book lifted the lid on harassment and bullying of women within the organisation. I think you did touch on it a bit before. What were the women's stories like, and what systems were in place for them?
Well, the real concern with that is that the women would say, and the men would say, that the place that you're meant to go at your workplace as a safe haven is human resources department. You can go there and you'll get, and that they said that in many cases they felt human resources, they left more angry with them than the actual perpetrator of their bullying or whatever they. So that's something again that needs to be examined in this independent inquiry.
So what happens to people who do speak out against the game? You have your own personal story.
Yeah, I do, but I tend, if you want to look at some of the people who've been thrown under the bus by the game in the name of the game, Dean Bailey was the one that really touched me the most, and I use that as the epilogue of, a true footy guy who comes from the suburbs of Melbourne, good enough to play at the highest level for Essendon. Not that many games, 50 or 60, I think. It ended up being a senior coach. He was an assistant coach at Essendon, so when they won the premiership in 2000, so he got a sense of, why we all love the game when your team can win a premiership. But then when it came his turn to be at the centre of an investigation, I felt that he was treated, he was made out as a scapegoat. He was spat out of the system, and he died, I think, very bewildered with the treatment that he got. There's James Hird, who it's a very vexed argument, and I think a lot of people's views of James Hird and Essendon is based on the information the AFL wanted you to know in the way that was characterised through the media. I try to tell what I think is the story of the Essendon saga in my chapter, the cashed up bogans, which was the phrase that James Hird's lawyer, Stephen Amendola, gave of the AFL. Obviously Essendon was guilty of an ad hoc, reckless, a shameful injections program. But there was two sides to that story, and unfortunately only one really got told. So James Hird was another, Mark Thompson, they only decided at the last minute to put Mark Thompson in for a penalty, but we saw what happened to his life. There's too many of these types of people out there for it to all be a coincidence. And so I try to tell all their stories. Even Tim Lane, the legendary broadcaster, the story that happened to him, where he tried to report on some questions that had been raised over the way that Kieran Jack, his father was an NRL legend, managed to land at the Sydney Swans in NRL heartlands. The price that Tim would have to pay for daring to go down that road, it's just unacceptable in my view. So, my own story, which gets overblown a bit, was in 2013 in the Essendon saga. They denied me my accreditation to the footy, which makes it hard in football terms. But that's the way that they roll. They like to show people who's boss, and most people fall into line. Other people write books.
Well, I think probably a lot of people here today want to know more about the Essendon scandal. If you could talk a bit more about that and what you've uncovered.
Well, the way I try to explain the Essendon scandal is that there's two separate stories that collide like two road trains on the Nullarbor, just bang, and it just became this 5-year extraordinary story. And the first story was obviously what Essendon did to its players. And there's, absolutely huge question marks there about what was going on, why were they doing it. Interestingly, though, Stephen Dank, the central character, and Dean Robinson had worked together in football. And I explain this, certainly not to the same extent, but at Geelong, at Gold Coast, and Dank later worked at Melbourne when the saga broke. But that's clearly the first part of, did Essendon use performance-enhancing drugs? Because there was no positive test, we don't know, but there's certainly circumstantial evidence that was presented suggested they did, but the AFL Anti-Doping Tribunal the first time found them not guilty, second one, the Court of Arbitration and Sport found them guilty. So that's that side of the story, which I think everyone is across. The other side of the story was the way the AFL manipulated the investigation, the way that the investigation was compromised, the leaking, the positioning, and that was peak boys club for me, the way that the system, and not just the AFL, but they relied on their journalists that they have. They relied on, famously Eddie Maguire had a Sarah, the mum, I don't know if you
That
know,
was it.
know the story. This mother who still no one really knows if she was a mother or not. I personally say she wasn't. I'd say she was an actress, but appeared on his program one morning, and it was said to be the game changer. Maybe it was, but so when you have those two storylines, and as we know, James had ended his own life at one stage. I look at what happened to the Essendon situation, and then I look at Cronulla up in Sydney, who far less sophisticated. I mean, they wouldn't know where to start to do what the AFL. You never underestimate the strategic capabilities of the AFL. But Cronulla they just let it happen naturally, and in the end, they got 5 weeks and won a premiership a few years later. And the toll to everyone, the game got ripped to shreds down here. I don't think if the AFL had the time again, that's probably the way that they would like it to play out, but they would never admit that. But again, that's the longest chapter in my book, trying to tell that story.
And following on from that, do you think this blind eye to drug culture is an issue across all sports though, or is the AFL the worst for it?
No, not at all. No, I think drugs and recreational drugs is a problem all over the world, and young kids. And it was interesting the way Dimitri brought in an illicit drugs policy for our game, which was in sort of competing with the WADA policy. In the end, we ended up with both. So our players probably drug tested more than any other. I'm not sure, how I feel about the AFL's illicit drugs policy, because it really became a brand protection policy. And the reason I know that is it used to be a 3-strike policy. And then a few years ago, it went down to 2 strikes. But I remember when it was a 3-strike policy, and I'd have this annual press conference at AFL House, and they would say, last year there was 19 players who had 2 strikes. But then when it went to a 2-strike policy, there was never a 2. No one actually got to. And I think statistically that's impossible to suddenly have none. But then again, it's a welfare model, and they can catch kids using drugs, they can get to them, and they can say, hey, But this is what Kenneth's point is, that the clubs aren't told who's had the strike. It's the AFL medical people. I think the club, Jeff Kenneth says that he'd rather the club deal with it because they're their players. But drugs is not an AFL problem alone. But the West Coast thing was an example of how if you tolerate that behaviour for long enough, which they did, and they got a premiership out of it, but look at the human toll. Cousins, Kerr, Chick, and others. It's probably, if they'd intervened sooner, then maybe they could have saved a couple of those guys.
And I think this is probably the last question, and then I'll hand it over to the audience. So when COVID hit, the AFL pretty much collapsed overnight. How much trouble are they in now?
I thought they were going to be in a lot of trouble, but they always find a way, and I'm glad they did, because I love the game. We don't want the game to go under, of course, but it was interesting for a competition that had plundered billions of dollars to pretty much go broke within 24 hours. Showed you how the expenditure was right at its limit. They weren't putting much away. I think they had a $60 million future fund. They were really lucky that they had bought Marvel Stadium. They didn't really have to buy it, because in about 10 years they would have got it for free under this arrangement that the government had put in place, but they bought it for $200 million a few years ago, and it's probably worth $1 billion. So they had that as insurance. I think if they didn't have that, they probably would have had to have got a big loan. But it was just interesting that for this giant industry, how close, how perilously close they came to collapsing. And I'm sure in the future, we don't really want another pandemic or whatever it is one day, but they might have a bit more tucked away for a rainy day. But it definitely, so I was going to say, it was interesting the way that they were able to survive was to cut the guts out of the administration. But and football departments, you know, a lot of great people have left the game, and probably the rank and file people, the heart and soul people. It's very tough on the industry. But those who have stayed, my understanding, I think, is that the AFL executive wages wouldn't have changed all that much. That's not just an AFL thing. I think, you know, some coaches and the players took a pretty small pay cut this year. Maybe some say 9%, more like 3%. But it's just a smaller industry. But it'll come back. It's like trimming your roses. I'll be back.
Thanks so much, Nick. So has anyone got any questions?
Like, known as game grown, big money, media rights, and the clubs that are holding to the AFL. I'll just leave you 3 comments. There's a line in Scarface, Al Pacino, which says, you got the money, you got the power. Then you got the books, that film was, Good Be the King, and having zero, but they cover up, they see nothing, they know nothing. There's that one question, given the cutbacks on staff, how big the media department? The media department is huge.
I think it used to be over 100 people in their media department, but it's not that anymore. What that was, AFL Media, it was called, was a way to say because the majority of the money in the game is TV revenue. I think it's 60%, could even be more, of the game is what Channel 7 and Foxtel, Channel 9 in the past pay. That pays all the bills. The AFL Media, I think, was a way for them to say to those, because there's only a limited number of people who can buy the TV rights, that if we build this, we might be able to produce our own, so we can bring in, you know, Google or Amazon, these sort of big international, and try to grow the market a bit. And you know, AFL Media was actually quite a good product if you want to get scores, if you want to get injuries, but you probably wouldn't have gone there if you wanted to find out what's happening in the Essendon saga, for example. But I don't think it's anywhere near as big. I know it's not anymore, but I think it was designed as a bit of stalking horse for TV rights. Yeah, I think that I say in the book that there's 2 scoreboards. One is commercial success, commercial might. You know, that you go to a game, it's brilliantly presented, and you can't question them on that. They are really good at what they do on that scoreboard. Some might argue the rules have been stuffed up, and I'll probably on those. I think interchange is a disease in the game that needs to be taken away. But you know, on the whole, the national competition is very well put together and very well managed. The other scoreboard, which is what I focus on in the book, is the way you treat people, the way you treat your supporters, the way you commit to integrity, accountability, transparency. On that one, they're 20 goals down behind their competitors. To me, that's the area that they have to improve, and that's where the reform has to come from. They dispute that. But I'm yet to meet a supporter on the street who disagrees with me. Not one. And so, you know, when I see a poll that 6% of football fans say that they think the AFL administration is doing a good job, for me that's something they should look at and say 6%. Yeah. But they don't care about that because they don't have to. But that's kind of why I wrote the book. That what you say there is commercially good on you, fantastic. Having said that, it's a pretty good product that you inherited. You know, like you didn't invent it. You definitely improved it and you've modernised. But this other scoreboard to me is probably more important.
And would you include suburban country football?
Yeah.
On the scoreboard as well?
Yeah. You know, you look at the state of Australian rules. This actually drives me insane as well. People think that the sport is AFL. Sport is Australian rules football. The elite competition is the AFL. Like you go to some museum, it's like AFL. It's not the AFL, but that's just a new point. But the health of the game in the grassroots isn't as good as it should be. And you got the threat of soccer. You know, you saw the scenes this morning in England and Italy. Like, you'd be arrogant to think that in 50 years that people will be as passionate about Australian rules. You can't take them for granted, is what I say. And so I like this model they have in England, where you have English Premier League administration. They look after just the top game, but then you have another body which is just as powerful that look after grassroots and the lower leagues and the national team, and so you sort of have a separation of powers. Okay, so when I say we should reform, maybe we should look at all sorts of different models to protect Australian rules, not just protect the AFL and its self-interest.
I have read the book and it's terrific, so thank you very much. But what if it was just the AFL wants to question public health? And now that it has been published, there is anything else we must do?
No, they haven't. Like I said, one of the things with the book is it was almost a dot joining exercise, and that a lot of these scandals are sort of familiar with them, that they were covered off. You know, like I was saying, you go and get the documents. I did the majority of that work in my day job, the Herald Sun. And so, you know, they can't dispute. You can't. One thing I've always, an old editor said to me is, if you get the document, they can't dispute the document. That's the legwork you've got to do to. I'm sure they're no longer producing documents at the AFL, but if you can get the proof, whether it be a tape or a secret report, you know, they're the things that you've got to be able to get, and that's the legwork of journalism. Where you drive people mad, you know, track it down, make a million phone calls for one document. But yeah, it's hard to dispute the facts. I can't, but I do remember when a journalist went on a program and explained the way that they thought that I got it, and that didn't end well for that particular person, because they got that horribly wrong. But I always suspected that the AFL had told them, that journalist, what they thought might have been the source of it, and they were wrong. But you know, you never reveal your sources. But I don't know what they're going to do with documents in the future. Might put them on some microchip or something. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'd like to get people to talk to you. I mean, when you're talking to people about the book and
Yeah.
claims, were people happy to speak to you? Was it
Yeah,
hard to get people
it's a
on?
good question. Everyone I spoke to was probably reticent at their starting point. So many didn't want to do it, didn't want to go on the record because they were worried about retribution or making life difficult for their club or their organisation. but I was able to get, in my view, enough people on the record, like Richard Collis, who was chairman of the Sydney Swans. He told his story, and Ross Oakley, who's one of the original CEOs, described Richard Collis as the second most significant administrator in the history of the game, modern AFL, after Graham Samuel. And that was interesting because in one of the chapters I talk about the recruiting of Buddy Franklin to the Swans and Hawthorn. A phone call that he received, Collis, from Mike Fitzpatrick, the AFL Commission chairman, which is Richard's wife here in the next room through my phone. I was thrilled to get people like him and Peter Gordon. I spoke to a lot of the original commissioners, Graham Samuel and Peter Scanlon, Dick Seddon, who was brilliant. So I was able to get enough people on the record and enough documentary evidence to, in my opinion, to make it work. But there is a lot of people who I had to rely on who wouldn't be identified. And yeah, I think we get the balance right and it works. Certainly in a book and even in newspapers, you will often see an unattributed quote. I think in context that's okay. But yeah, to answer your question, it was harder to get people on the record. Well, I knew it would be difficult, but it's difficult for people to speak up in this industry, unfortunately.
Did you get to talk to Dr. Reid?
Yeah, I did.
What did he
Bruce
say?
Rader was the Essendon.
What did he say?
Yeah, and then Bruce died last year, was it? Or last year, and you know, he you know, it really hit him in his life, late in his life, that, you know, and it ate away at him, I think. But if you knew him, he's a pretty straight sort of shooter, and he dealt with it. I think he was angry about it. He's the way that he dealt with the AFL at the time, if you remember. He wouldn't take the penalty in that commission fast hearing. They said they had a hearing, but there was never a hearing. What they did was they siloed them around offices in the AFL building and put pressure on them until they relented. That's the hearing. And Bruce Reid wasn't going to have any of that. And he said, I'm not agreeing to your penalty. And he lodged a Supreme Court application a few days later, and they dropped his case like a hot potato, a bit like our Dean Robinson, who was, you know, portrayed as the architect of the drugs program, the gang. He lodged a Supreme Court writ. He subpoenaed or threatened to subpoena all of the AFL senior figures, and he got $1 million wrongful dismissal payout. So how does that
Hush
work?
money. Hush money.
Yeah, well, they're your words, but yeah, it defies logic to me that he could get that, but that was brilliantly done by his lawyer, David Galway. So yeah, hopefully Bruce Reid's written something down somewhere. We'll see the light of day someday.
What will the next book be about?
I won't be writing it. I actually stupidly came up with the idea to write this book on a run in Bali, and I haven't been for a run since. So, but I thought, yeah, I've just got to put it down in one place. So I said to my wife, Lucy, I'm going to put this idea about a book. So yeah, it sounds good. 3.5 years later, you know, 2 kids later, weekends gone, and holidays, I'm sitting there on this laptop. I don't think there'll be one anytime soon. And to be honest, I don't think I could write one. Because I've covered footy for 20 years, I knew that the bodies were buried. I knew that nuance, you know, someone said, could you write that about cricket? I just couldn't, you know, I don't know enough about to do it. Maybe one day I'll do it when I'm a bit older.
I was just going to say, sorry, in terms of the parody AFL, how many controversies are out there that we actually don't hear about? That get stopped, that are blocked from
Yeah.
media?
I think what he's trying to say, what he didn't put in the book.
Is there a lot out there?
Well, there's a few things, but most of the, like I said during this interview, is a lot of the things are not of their doing. So they come out one way or another, but it's just the way that they manage it for their commercials. They always start at the end. What's the best outcome for us here? Okay, so Essendon, we want the players to get off because we can't have no Essendon for 2 years. So let's work backwards. What can we do? Well, we take Hurdy down. If we try and blame the coaches and the architects of the, you know, and you can see the logic of what they're trying to do, but is that the way justice should work? I don't think so. But I'm sure there's other things out there, but I've pretty much got as much as I could by 400 pages.
I've got a question from one of our online viewers. What do you think? Who do you think will be the next AFL CEO? And will Gill have an input into that change? And in parentheses, it's got jobs for mates.
Well, I'd heard, I don't know if this is right, but that you know, an internal successor is sort of viewed favourably. You know, if the commission, if you can groom someone like Dimitri did with Gill, that they like that idea of having an internal successor. But I don't think that's healthy in terms of, you know, that boys' club will have to choose one from within. If it was me, I'd definitely be going outside of the boys' club. Having said that, I reckon you need to work in the industry to understand. It would be difficult to go and pluck someone who's running a mine or something and bring them in. Not ruling it out, but I would think Brendan Gale of Richmond would be the guy. Having said that, I think that Peggy O'Neill, if you got a woman and you could lower the temperature of that commission. See, it's interesting, the commission itself is, most of them live in the state. They don't have a lot of football IQ. You know, they come from some successful bank or merchant bankers or whatever they are, but they actually don't really, the majority of them understand football, which is the core product. But I would think Brendan Gale, given what he was able to do with Richmond, transform a basket case club into a premiership club with 100,000 members. There's not much more that really he could do, but for whatever reason, he's out of favour as far as I've been able to establish with the commission. I think they would want an internal candidate like Travis Holt or someone like that. But you know, so the options for me would be go to Brendan Gale. Brian Cook at Geelong would have been a terrific CEO. He's retiring at the end of the year. He's missed that boat, but he actually went for Dimitri's job and Gill's job and missed out both times. Gale came second or third and Gill got the job, so he'd be the one. But I'd do that, or I'd go outside competition and try and find someone else. But I don't think they'd last long in the boys' club, whoever that would be.
And outside it could be James Sullivan, wouldn't you think? He's gone around, he's down at Geelong and he used to do the Australian cricket.
Yeah, I think he's in golf, Australia.
He originally come from Carlton, but
He was down there at Carlton in those days. No, I wouldn't be voting for him.
no, okay. But if you're talking about Gale, I think the VRC interested in him. VRC, Victorian Race Club.
Yeah.
So he might be a
Steve
smoke.
Rossich,
Yeah, he's the Fremantle one, but in the future, go for the VRC.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, he's pretty impressive. And as a Richmond supporter, I can tell you that winning 3 premierships in 4 years was never on my radar as a kid. We were lucky to win a game, but he's pretty impressive.
I'm just bursting here, hearing about the boys' club. I read the book, it was great, couldn't get enough of it. But then we go back to more boys' club, like throwing around more boys.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I just did my AFL members survey yesterday, and I love the question, would you like an add-on to your AFLW? So how many games? Or I think it was, they started with, would you like 10 games? Would you like this? So I just filled out the box. How about you treat the AFLW with some sort of respect and value, first of all?
Yeah.
So, why not Peggy O'Neill?
No, well, I
that's the
did
whole
mention
thing.
Peggy. I think, you know, I'm looking at the commission. That's the sort of person as a commission chair.
Yeah, but
she would be.
AFL,
No,
I
they
had it
wouldn't.
up to here with,
Yeah,
I'm a
no,
Collingwood supporter, so I think the second edition really needs to have the Collingwood board.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
that's,
itself,
I think,
but you've got to, we're just trying to think of some women.
no, I think Peggy O'Neill would be a brilliant chairperson. I just don't think that the current commission are thinking that way. Now, there are 2 women, 3, I think, on the AFL commission, but but on your point about AFLW, what's really interesting there is that there's going to be a bit of a fight down the track in terms of pay equity. It's going to be really fascinating to see the way that Gill and the executive deal with that issue, because even in the last CBA that the women did, a large group of the women's players weren't happy with sort of what they were the deal that they were forced to take. So I think down the track, that's probably 3 or 4 years away.
Well, maybe your paper in the Age could start putting it,
Well,
just 4 or 5 pages in.
The AFLW?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Harold Sun, to be fair, is champion of AFLW.
Oh, okay, all right, I need to do
But
that.
one of the problems with it is, of course, that they make this competition condensed to 9 weeks, end of the cricket season. They try and, you know, I think it should be played in conjunction with the men's competition. But if they do that, then they're opening their way to pay equity. So they need to keep it as this little sort of AFLX style thing.
You don't want to take it.
No, we don't like AFLX.
Do they treat Tasmania the same way, do you think?
Yeah, well, Tasmania's been shameful the way it's been neglected, and I feel though that the tide's turned for Tasmania. Now, if you saw that Essendon Hawthorn game a couple of weeks ago, the outer and just the Tasmanian Essendon supporters, there's kind of like a carnival down there, and I think that might have been a bit of an awakening for the AFL. Is that if we take Richmond, Collingwood, Essendon, Carlton, and they play their away games against Tassie, we could sell 30,000, 40,000, maybe 30,000 a week. And they might be thinking, hey, there might be a revenue stream down there, because always follow the money. But if that's the reason they do it and Tassie get a team, I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, they sort of plunged everything into the Gold Coast, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, I like the Gold Coast as a model. I actually bought a Gold Coast membership in their first year because I thought this is a great place to have an AFL team, Australian Rules. But they just completely mismanaged it. You know, from the start, they had everyone who started in a job at Gold Coast had never done that job before. CEO first time, president first time, coach first time, captain never been a captain, football manager never been that. None of them have done that before, which is a massive mistake. The Giants had Kevin Sheedy and Gubby Allen, and they had all these and the culture that they created almost overnight at the Giants was incredible. I used to do boundary, still do, for 3AW. If you go into the Giants change rooms in a Melbourne game in their first years, and they would open up the change rooms, and it'd be like going to Shepparton footy ground with aunties and uncles, and and because they made Kevin Sheedy and Gubby and these guys made sure that they build a real club culture. Whereas if you went to the Gold Coast rooms, it was like you're at the dentist. It was just no one there. The players looked like, I can't wait to get out. And it was just wrong. And that goes to my point about the Gold Coast is the AFL's team. And they might know how to make money and they might know how to run the comp, but they don't get clubs. And the Gold Coast has been a real blight in the game for 11 years. They come in good slowly, and so they should with all of their draft picks. But, look at that, compare the Giants who sort of went rogue a bit. So thanks for the licenses, we're going to do it ourselves. And they've played in 3 prelims in the grand final.
I asked you, Michael, journalistic colleagues in the football world, do they show any awareness or embarrassment that oftentimes their integrity is questioned through their compliance, their compliance with the AFL? It was so evident during the drug saga that they were just churning out the AFL line without any attempt to report, as journalists should.
No, but they wouldn't. And if you sat one of them here, they would argue to their blue in the face about why, what we think or what I think and you think about what the Essendon situation is wrong, and that James Hird deserved what he's got, and the poor AFL, they had to deal with Essendon who are out of control and had to, we had to heavy hand them, and so they believe in what they wrote and what they won their Walkleys for, and that's fine. But I'd love to debate them about it. But the football media, by and large, do an incredible job, in terms of covering the game. I mean, it's one journal for every player. And there's celebration of the game, great photos, and footage, and the articles and features. It's all. But when it comes to the spotlight on AFL integrity, I don't think the football media does its job. I think it'd be like covering federal politics but not criticising the government.
They're complicit in the fact that we've got an AFL run the way it is.
Yeah, I think they are. Some sections of the media definitely agree with that. I think some sections of the media have either been complicit in getting that message out that they want. Some may, and that's the extreme version. Others are just too scared. Others don't care. Some don't even think about, and others move on. But I think the football media, when it comes to integrity of AFL, has been failing for a long time.
I agree. Are you isolated in any way because of the stand that you take?
Yeah, I guess so. But as I say to people, I can't believe where I like to go fishing for stories. There's no other rods in the water. So I hope they don't come over here. There's lots of trout down there. And it's good fun catching fish. But look, I don't know. There's a few young reporters coming through that I'm quite happy with their the signs that they're showing. And I don't want to say be arrogant about that. I mean, most people you talk to will say, he's a troublemaker, he's whatever. But I'm pretty comfortable with the stories that I've covered up, uncovered, that important that they're told, so that people like yourself we get closer to the truth.
We've got time for one more question, or have you got some?
Okay.
Yes, this gentleman here, and then we'll
This
go to
gentleman.
the. Of course you can.
Don't put yourself on a pedestal. On every issue, etc. Gambling, the likes of the Sony, big 365, it's like the 2 minute disco, so like flashing.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there's that. Then you got ticketing. On that probably, but there's people that go every week, can't follow this time. No, scalping. I'm sorry, the scalp. With AFL sanctions, scalping, which says $3,000 down and whatever.
Yeah.
And 12 years ago, on their site, they've got 35 AFL accredited on sales.
Yeah, the
Cheap
ticket.
estate, come for a weekend, and you got your ticket. And the person that goes every week, see you later. Now, about 5 years ago, the medallion members at Etihad, they moved across equal rights in the AFL section. Level 2, there's 12 days, and they were given 9. Come finals time. Yeah,
The grand
So
final.
they say something, but they're doing it.
Was worth, I think it's about $150 million event, the grand final. Your point on gambling is interesting because, and I interviewed Bruce Matheson in the book, who's the pokies king, and he makes a very good point that the AFL Commission has made the decision that pokies are evil and all clubs should be out of pokies, and I don't like pokies, so I agree with that. But then he says, so gin's banned, but over here, sports betting, whiskey, that's good. Drink that all day long. We've got a $10 million deal, the AFL, with the sports betting. And it's the hypocrisy of that, which just, and Bruce Matheson's right. You're banning this one, but you'll go insane if you try and look for consistency.
Okay, so apologies to everybody online who's answered questions. We're not going to get through them all tonight. But this one is: Do you see James Hird returning to coach?
No, absolutely not. James Hird will never have anything to do with that's mainstream. I see that he's invested in one of these mouth guards that look, with concussion, he'll be on his son Tom, I think, kicked 3 goals in the Essendon VFL team on the weekend, and I doubt he'll get a game this year, but he's making progress, so you might see James back at the footy, but I wouldn't have thought that I wouldn't think that he would have any intention of getting back into football. Bombers are going well without him, aren't they?
It's great to have him back at the club, though.
Yeah, I think he'll go back to the club, but there's a lot of raw wounds that Essendon, relationship permanently destroyed. But one day, I think he's been back. I saw Bomber Thompson was back at footy on the weekend. The thing that will help Essendon the most is to start winning again. But yeah, I don't think he'll coach again.
So sorry to all those people online who couldn't answer your questions, but I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. So as we said before, Kate's over there from Collis selling Nick's book, and he's very happy for you. And just to let you know that we will be closing at 9 o'clock tonight. So how about a big round of applause?